My name is Julius Malema. For many years, people knew me as a politician with a strong voice in South Africa. I spoke about justice, equality, and the future of our nation. I worked hard, built a successful career, and accumulated valuable assets. I owned luxurious homes, profitable investments, and enjoyed a lifestyle that many people could only dream about. Like many successful people, I believed that achievement was the result of determination, discipline, and personal ability. I convinced myself that I had earned everything I possessed through hard work and sacrifice. Yet something was slowly changing inside me. Although I often spoke about the struggles of ordinary people, I rarely spent time living among those who were suffering the most. I saw poverty from a distance. I saw statistics, reports, and headlines, but I did not truly see the people behind them. When poor families asked for help, I often felt pity rather than understanding. I believed I was already doing enough. I thought my public speeches and political efforts were sufficient. What I failed to recognize was that my heart was becoming harder with each passing year. Today, I am sharing this story not because I want anyone to admire me. I am sharing it because there are many leaders, business owners, and successful individuals walking the same path I once walked. I was one of them. Then one night, everything changed. I witnessed something that transformed the direction of my life forever. It was the night Jesus Christ showed me what awaits those who possess power but lack mercy toward the poor. And it was also the night He asked me to use my greatest asset to change the lives of people who were suffering. Before that night changed everything, I was living a life that many people would describe as successful. My primary residence was in Sandton, one of the most affluent areas in Johannesburg. The house was large, secure, and surrounded by comforts that made daily life easy. Expensive vehicles sat in the driveway. Security personnel watched over the property. Staff members handled tasks that I barely noticed anymore. From the outside, it appeared that I had achieved everything a person could desire. Yet only a few kilometers away stood Alexandra Township. Thousands of families lived there under conditions that were completely different from mine. Many struggled with unemployment. Some households lacked reliable access to electricity. Others faced constant challenges obtaining clean water. Young people searched for opportunities that seemed impossible to find. South Africa had long struggled with high levels of youth, unemployment, and countless families felt trapped in cycles of poverty that stretched across generations. I knew these facts. Everyone knew these facts. The information was available in reports, newspapers, government briefings, and public discussions. But knowing something and feeling it are two very different things. I drove past poor communities countless times. I saw informal settlements from a distance. I heard stories of families struggling to survive. Yet I rarely stopped long enough to truly understand their pain. In my mind, I had already done my part. I spoke about social justice. I supported policies intended to help ordinary citizens. I used my public platform to discuss inequality. I believe those efforts were enough. Looking back now, I realized I had fallen into a dangerous trap. I had become comfortable discussing poverty without personally confronting it. I had become skilled at speaking on behalf of struggling people while spending very little time among them. The more successful I became, the easier it was to separate myself from their reality. And the more distance I created, the less sensitive my heart became. At the time, I did not recognize what was happening inside me. I did not realize that compassion can slowly disappear when comfort becomes your permanent environment. I did not realize that a person can speak about helping the poor while gradually losing the ability to truly see them. Most importantly, I did not realize that God was watching every part of my life, including the parts that nobody else could see. I believed I was doing enough. I believed I was on the right path. I believed I understood what justice meant. But God was preparing to teach me a lesson that would completely transform my understanding of mercy, wealth, leadership, and responsibility. And that lesson began on a night I will never forget. A few weeks later, after an exhausting day of meetings and travel across Johannesburg, I returned home late in the evening. I remember feeling completely drained. The house was quiet, the city lights shimmered outside my windows. Nothing seemed unusual. I went to bed expecting another ordinary night. But sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, something happened that I still struggle to fully explain. I suddenly became aware that I was no longer experiencing reality in the normal way. It felt as though I had been lifted out of the physical world. The room around me disappeared. The familiar sounds of the city vanished. Everything became silent. Then a brilliant light appeared before me. It was unlike any light I had ever seen. It was not harsh, yet it was impossible to ignore. It seemed to reveal everything while hiding nothing. As I stood there, overwhelmed by what I was experiencing, a voice spoke. The voice carried both authority and clarity. There was no confusion about what was being said. Every word felt weighty. Every word felt final. The voice said, "My child, look and see what awaits those who do not love the poor." The moment those words were spoken, a deep fear entered my heart. Not the fear of physical danger, not the fear of losing money or status. It was a different kind of fear. It was the fear of realizing that God was showing me something I desperately needed to understand. I wanted to look away. Part of me wanted the experience to end, but I could not. The voice had commanded me to look, and so I looked. As I did, the light before me began to change. What had appeared bright and peaceful suddenly opened into something far darker. The atmosphere shifted. The sense of comfort disappeared. A heavy feeling settled over everything around me. I knew I was about to witness something terrible. Something that would force me to confront truths I had spent years avoiding. In that moment, every achievement of my life seemed insignificant. My title meant nothing. My influence meant nothing. My wealth meant nothing. I was no longer a politician standing before crowds. I was simply a man standing before God. And what I was about to see would shake me to my core. Then the horrifying scene began to unfold before my eyes. Before me appeared a vast darkness. It stretched further than I could see. There was no horizon. There was no end. The place felt empty and crowded at the same time. Then I began to hear voices. At first they were distant. Soon they became impossible to ignore. Cries, screams, desperate pleas. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once. It was unlike anything I had ever heard on earth. The suffering carried in those voices pierced straight through me. As my eyes adjusted, I began to see figures moving within the darkness. Some were kneeling, some were wandering aimlessly. Others appeared frozen in grief. What shocked me most was who these people were. Many of them had once been wealthy. Many had held positions of influence. Some had been political leaders. Some had been successful business owners. Some had commanded organizations that affected the lives of millions. These were not people who had lacked opportunity. These were people who had possessed power, people who had possessed resources, people who had possessed the ability to help others. Yet now they stood in unimaginable misery. I noticed one thing that all of them seemed to share: an unbearable thirst. Their faces were filled with desperation. Again and again they searched for water. Again and again they reached toward what appeared to be streams in the distance. But every time they approached, the water disappeared. The relief they desired always remained beyond their reach. The thirst never ended. It never weakened. It never paused. Then I saw something even more disturbing. Food appeared before them. enough food to satisfy their hunger, enough food to bring relief. But whenever they reached for it, it vanished. They could see it, they could smell it, they could almost touch it, yet they could never possess it. The suffering was not only physical, it was deeply personal. The greatest torment came from something else: memories. Each person seemed trapped inside the consequences of their own choices. Sins from their lives replayed before them again and again. They watched opportunities they had ignored. They watched people they had refused to help. They watched moments when compassion had been possible, but selfishness had won. I saw men and women reliving conversations they had forgotten long ago. A hungry child asking for assistance, a struggling family seeking support, a desperate worker pleading for understanding, a widow asking for mercy. Every cry they had ignored had returned. Every opportunity they had wasted stood before them once more, and this time they could not escape it. One man fell to the ground and covered his face. Another cried out for forgiveness. Others begged for a second chance, but no second chance came. The memories continued. The regret continued. The suffering continued. As I watched, fear gripped my heart, not because I recognized those people, but because I recognized something of myself. I remembered moments when I had been too busy, moments when I had looked away, moments when I had convinced myself that someone else's suffering was not my responsibility. For the first time, I understood how dangerous spiritual indifference could become. I began to tremble. A terrible realization entered my mind. If I continued living the way I had been living, my future could become like theirs. The thought shook me more than anything I had witnessed. And then the vision focused on one particular man. What happened next would haunt me for weeks afterward. The vision narrowed until I could see one man more clearly than all the others. He stood apart from the crowd. His clothing immediately caught my attention. Even though this was not the world of the living, he still appeared as he had during his life. He wore an expensive suit. His appearance reflected wealth, influence, and success. I somehow knew things about him without being told. When he was alive, he had owned multiple businesses. He had controlled valuable properties. He had accumulated more money than most people could earn in several lifetimes. To the world, he had been considered successful. People respected him. People sought his approval. People admired what he possessed. But the vision revealed a side of his story that few had ever seen. Every day during his life, struggling people had crossed his path. Families facing hardship, workers needing help, children lacking opportunities, widows carrying burdens they could not bear alone. Again and again, opportunities for kindness had appeared before him. Again and again, he had chosen himself. He always had a reason. Sometimes he said he was too busy. Sometimes he believed others would help. Sometimes he convinced himself that the poor were responsible for their own situation. Sometimes he simply did not care enough to act. As the vision continued, I watched him fall to his knees. The suffering on his face was unbearable to witness. His hands trembled. His voice cracked. Every trace of pride had disappeared. Every trace of arrogance had vanished. The powerful businessman who had once commanded respect now looked completely broken. Then he spoke. His words were simple. He did not ask for wealth. He did not ask for power. He did not ask to regain everything he had lost. He asked for a single drop of water, just one drop to ease the thirst that consumed him, one drop to bring a moment of relief, one drop to lessen his agony. But no answer came. No one responded. No relief arrived. His plea disappeared into the darkness. I watched as he continued begging again and again, yet nothing changed. The pain remained. The thirst remained. The regret remained. As I stared at him, a memory surfaced from deep within my mind. I had heard this story before, not in a speech, not in a political meeting, not in a newspaper article. I had heard it in scripture. Suddenly, I remembered the biblical account of the rich man and Lazarus. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The wealthy man before me looked different from the one described in the Bible, yet the lesson was the same: a life filled with comfort, a heart that ignored suffering, a future filled with regret. The realization sent a chill through me. This was not merely a vision about someone else. It was a warning directed at me, a warning about what can happen when success becomes more important than mercy, a warning about what happens when wealth grows while compassion shrinks. I could not stop thinking about it. Even after the vision ended, the image of that man remained fixed in my mind. His desperate request for a single drop of water echoed in my thoughts day and night. I knew I needed answers. I knew I needed guidance. And only a few days later, I would meet someone who helped me understand exactly what I had seen. A few days after the vision, I found myself unable to concentrate on anything else. The image of the wealthy man remained in my thoughts from morning until night. I could still hear the cries. I could still remember the darkness. Most of all, I could still hear the desperate request for a single drop of water. No matter how hard I tried to return to my normal routine, something inside me had changed. I knew I needed spiritual guidance. So I made a decision. Instead of seeking advice from political colleagues or business associates, I traveled to a small church in Soweto. There I met Pastor Samuel Nkosi. He was not famous. He did not lead a large congregation. He was simply a humble servant of God who had spent many years ministering to ordinary people. When I arrived, he welcomed me warmly. We sat together in a quiet room. For a long time, I told him everything. I described the light. I described the voice. I described the darkness. I described the wealthy people I had seen suffering. And I described the man who begged for a single drop of water. Pastor Nkosi listened without interrupting. When I finally finished speaking, he remained silent for several moments. Then he slowly reached for his Bible. He opened it carefully and turned to the Gospel of Luke chapter 16. He looked at me and said, "Julius, listen carefully." Then he began to read. The story described a rich man who lived in luxury every day. Outside his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus. Lazarus suffered greatly. He was hungry. He was weak. He longed for even the smallest scraps from the rich man's table. Yet the wealthy man ignored him. Day after day, year after year, the rich man enjoyed comfort while Lazarus endured suffering. Then Pastor Nkosi continued reading. Eventually, both men died. Lazarus was comforted. The rich man found himself in a place of torment. And there, in his suffering, the rich man made a request, not for wealth, not for power, not for another opportunity to enjoy life. He asked for a drop of water, just a drop, a single drop to cool his tongue and ease his pain. The moment Pastor Nkosi read those words, I felt my entire body grow cold. I stared at him in disbelief. It was exactly what I had seen. Exactly. The same thirst, the same desperation, the same plea. I had not remembered every detail of the biblical account before the vision. Yet what I witnessed matched the story with frightening precision. Pastor Nkosi continued reading. The rich man then begged for another favor. He asked that someone be sent back to warn his family. He wanted his loved ones to avoid the same fate. But the answer he received was heartbreaking. It was too late. The opportunity to change had already passed. When the pastor closed the Bible, neither of us spoke for several moments. The room felt completely still. Finally, he looked directly at me. "Julius," he said quietly, Perhaps God is giving you a warning while there is still time to respond. Those words pierced my heart because deep down I knew he was right. The vision was not given to satisfy my curiosity. It was not given to entertain me. It was not given so that I could tell an interesting story. It was a warning about the condition of my heart, a warning about the responsibility that comes with influence and resources, a warning about what happens when people become more attached to possessions than to compassion. As I left the church that day, I carried something far heavier than fear. I carried conviction, and that conviction would soon force me to make the most difficult decision of my life. After meeting Pastor Nkosi, I could no longer escape what God was showing me. The vision followed me everywhere. During meetings, I thought about it. While traveling, I thought about it. Late at night, when everything was quiet, I thought about it even more. Sleep became difficult. Some nights I would wake before dawn and sit alone, staring into the darkness. I kept asking myself the same question. If I were to stand before God today, what would I say? The question would not leave me. For years, I had measured success by achievements, influence, and assets. Now I began measuring my life differently. I started examining everything I own, every investment, every property, every account, every possession that had become part of my identity. As I reviewed my finances, I realized how much wealth had accumulated over the years. Several investments were worth millions of rand. Properties had increased in value. Assets that once seemed ordinary now represented enormous resources. Among all those possessions, one stood above the rest, the largest mansion in my personal portfolio. It was a symbol of success, a symbol of achievement, a symbol of everything I had spent years building. And yet, every time I thought about that house, I had the same question in my heart. What are you doing for those who have nothing? I tried to resist. I wish I could tell you otherwise. But the truth is that I struggled. Part of me wanted to obey God. Part of me wanted to protect everything I had worked so hard to obtain. One voice said, "You can help people without sacrificing so much." Another voice said, "Keep your assets, keep your security, keep your future protected." I created excuses. I created arguments. I searched for compromises. But the conviction remained. Day after day, week after week, the memory of the wealthy man begging for a single drop of water returned again and again. I began to realize something important. The greatest battle was not between wealth and poverty. It was not between success and failure. The greatest battle was happening inside my own heart. Would I trust God more than I trusted my possessions? Would I value mercy more than comfort? Would I continue living for myself, or would I finally use what I had been given to serve others? The struggle lasted for weeks. Some days I felt ready to act. Other days fear would return. Friends and advisors often spoke about protecting assets and preserving wealth. The world constantly teaches us to accumulate more, to hold tighter, to build bigger, to secure ourselves against every possible risk. But God seemed to be teaching me a completely different lesson. I slowly understood that stewardship is not ownership. Everything we possess is temporary. Every house, every investment, every title, every achievement. One day, all of it will remain behind. Only the choices we made with those blessings will matter. That realization changed everything. Eventually, the inner conflict reached a point where a decision could no longer be postponed. I knew exactly what God was asking me to do. And when I finally made that decision, the people around me could hardly believe it. The decision came quietly. There was no dramatic announcement, no cameras, no public event, just a moment when I finally stopped arguing with God. One morning, after weeks of prayer, reflection, and inner struggle, I accepted what I believe Jesus had been asking me to do from the very beginning. I would let go of my greatest material possessions and use those resources to help people whose suffering I had ignored for far too long. The first step was the hardest. I sold the largest mansion I owned. The property that had once represented success and status was placed on the market. When the sale was completed, I felt something unexpected. Instead of fear, I felt relief. Instead of loss, I felt freedom. Soon afterward, I began liquidating several luxury assets that I no longer believed were necessary. Investments that had once been untouchable became tools for something greater. Resources that had been serving my comfort would now serve struggling communities. The money was directed into housing initiatives, clean water projects, educational support programs, and vocational training opportunities. Families who had spent years living in unsafe conditions received homes. Communities gained access to clean water through newly constructed wells. Children who faced barriers to education received assistance that helped them remain in school. Training programs were launched to help people develop practical skills and create opportunities for long-term employment. I did not do these things alone. Many dedicated people joined the effort. Community leaders, volunteers, educators, and local organizations worked tirelessly to make sure the resources reached those who truly needed them. The impact spread farther than I had imagined. Yet not everyone celebrated the decision. Some friends were shocked, others were concerned. A few believed I had completely lost my mind. They asked me difficult questions. What happens if you need that money later? What about your financial future? Why would you give away assets that took years to build? Some even accused me of acting emotionally rather than rationally. I understood their concerns. In many ways, they reflected the same fears I had wrestled with myself. But something inside me had changed. For years, I had measured security by the size of my possessions. Now I was beginning to measure security differently. I had learned that peace does not come from owning more. Peace comes from knowing that your life is aligned with what God has called you to do. For the first time in many years, I could sleep peacefully. The anxiety that had followed me after the vision began to fade. The burden that had weighed on my heart became lighter. I no longer felt trapped between conviction and comfort. I had chosen a path. And although that path required sacrifice, it also brought a sense of purpose that wealth alone had never provided. Looking back now, I realized that the greatest miracle was not the sale of a mansion. It was the transformation of my heart. Because when God asks us to release something, He is often preparing us to receive something far more valuable. And what I received next came from spending time among the very people I had once viewed only from a distance. Their lives would teach me lessons that no amount of money could ever buy. After making those changes, I realized something important. Writing checks was not enough. Funding projects was not enough. If God was truly transforming my heart, I needed to spend time with the people I claimed to care about. So I began traveling more frequently to communities that many people prefer to ignore. I spent time in Soweto. I visited Alexandra Township. I traveled through parts of Limpopo. I met families in the Eastern Cape. Instead of arriving for brief appearances and leaving quickly, I stayed longer. I sat with people. I listened. I learned. For years, I had spoken about poverty from a distance. Now, I was hearing the stories directly from those living through it every day. I met mothers who somehow managed to feed their children with almost nothing. Women who sacrificed their own meals so their sons and daughters could eat. Women who carried burdens that would have broken many people. Yet they continued moving forward with courage. I met fathers searching desperately for employment. Some had been looking for work for months, others for years. Despite repeated disappointments, They continued trying because their families depended on them. I met children who walked several kilometers to school each day. Some traveled before sunrise, some returned home after dark, yet they carried their books with determination because they believed education could change their future. Their resilience humbled me. The more time I spent among these communities, the more I realized how wrong I had been. Poor people do not need pity. Pity creates distance. Pity looks down from above. What people need is dignity. They need respect. They need opportunity. They need to be seen as human beings with value, intelligence, dreams, and potential. I also discovered something that surprised me. Many of the poorest people I met possessed a richness of spirit that wealth often fails to produce. They shared food when they had very little. They helped neighbors when they themselves were struggling. They celebrated small victories. They supported one another during hardship. In communities with almost nothing, I often found generosity. In places marked by difficulty, I often found hope. Those experiences changed my understanding of success. For much of my life, I had viewed wealth as the accumulation of resources. Now I began to see wealth differently. True wealth is not measured by what you keep. It is measured by what you give. True wealth is not determined by the size of your house. It is determined by the size of your compassion. True wealth is not about how many people serve you. It is about how many lives are improved because you chose to serve others. Ironically, the more time I spent among the poor, the richer I felt. Not financially, spiritually, emotionally, humanly. The people I had once believed needed my help were teaching me lessons I desperately needed to learn. They taught me gratitude. They taught me humility. They taught me perseverance. Most importantly, they taught me that every person carries God-given dignity regardless of their circumstances. By then I understood that the vision had never been only about me. It carried a message for every person who holds influence, wealth, authority, or responsibility over others, and that message became the final lesson God placed on my heart. As the months passed, I began to understand why God had allowed me to see that vision. It was never simply about fear. It was never simply about judgment. It was about mercy. God was giving me an opportunity to change while there was still time. The more I reflected on everything that had happened, the clearer one truth became. Power cannot save your soul. I had spent years surrounded by influential people. I had seen politicians rise and fall. I had watched leaders gain authority and later lose it. Position change. Governments change. Titles change. None of those things last forever. Money cannot save your soul. I had seen people dedicate their entire lives to accumulating wealth. Some succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. Yet many remained restless, anxious, and unsatisfied. No amount of money can fill a spiritual emptiness. No investment portfolio can purchase peace with God. No property can secure eternity. Fame cannot save your soul. Public recognition may bring admiration for a season. Crowds may cheer your name. People may praise your achievements. But eventually every spotlight fades. Every reputation is tested. Every human being must face the reality that earthly recognition is temporary. What God seeks is something entirely different. He seeks mercy. He seeks compassion. He seeks hearts that care for others. Over time, I came to understand that a great leader is not measured by the amount of wealth he accumulates. A great leader is measured by the number of lives improved through the resources entrusted to him. A great leader is not remembered because of what he owned. He is remembered because of what he gave. A great leader does not use people to build his success. He uses his success to serve people. Whenever I think back to the vision, I remember the wealthy man begging for a single drop of water. But I also remember something else. I remember that God showed me that sin before it was too late. He warned me before my heart became completely hardened. He corrected me before I traveled further down the wrong path. Today, if God were to ask me a question, I believe it would be this: what did you do for the poorest people I placed in your care? That question matters more to me now than any political achievement, financial milestone, or public recognition. And because of what happened that night, I can answer with peace in my heart, not because I am perfect, not because I have done everything right, but because I chose to respond when God confronted me. I chose to listen when He warned. I chose to change when He revealed the condition of my heart. When Jesus showed me that vision of hell, He was not simply warning me about where a path of selfishness could lead. He was rescuing me from becoming one of the people I saw there. After everything, I have come to understand that no power lasts forever if it is not used to serve people. Money, status, and influence cannot bring dignity to a nation when its people remain trapped in injustice, poverty, and division. The world today faces too many conflicts, too much inequality, and too much suffering. I pray for a better future for South Africa. I pray for a better future for Africa. I pray for the people of the United States. And I pray for everyone around the world who longs for peace, justice, and hope. Let us reject selfishness and uncontrolled greed. Let us stand against injustice, oppression, and every force that seeks to divide human beings from one another. Let us build societies founded on respect, unity, compassion, and responsibility toward future generations. No matter how difficult circumstances may become, do not lose faith in the future. Every nation possesses the power to change its destiny when its people unite around what is right. Africa will rise, justice will prevail, and hope will always belong to those who refuse to abandon their dream of a better world. As I share this story, I invite you to reflect on your own life. You do not need to be wealthy to show mercy. You do not need to hold public office to help others. You do not need great power to make a meaningful difference. Sometimes the greatest acts of compassion begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And if this testimony has encouraged you, challenged you, or reminded you of the importance of caring for others, please leave a word of encouragement and continue working with us as we spread hope to more people around the world. Thank you for listening to my story.